Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we take a deep dive into Bonfire of the Humanities, Rescuing the Classics in an Age of Academic Faddism by Victor Davis Hanson, John Heath, and Bruce Thornton. This deep dive is all about uncovering the core arguments from this really thought-provoking book. At its heart, it's a pretty scathing critique, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Of the state of the humanities, and especially classics, in American universities right around the turn of the millennium.
And they argue the field is in crisis, but not just because of outside forces.
No, that's key. They say it's largely self-inflicted wounds, really. Things like, well, academic hypocrisy. What they see is rampant careerism, a kind of misguided multiculturalism, they argue, and just neglecting the core job of teaching.
Which they claim leads to this decline in, well, rigorous scholarship and, maybe more importantly, public relevance.
Exactly. But it's not just complaining. It's also this passionate call, really, to get back to the foundations of the Western intellectual tradition.
So things like accessible teaching, research that actually means something to people outside academia.
And a real commitment to pursuing truth rather than just following ideological fads. That's the core message.
Okay, so we're going to unpack these arguments, look at some of the quite surprising examples they use, and think about what it all means for learning today. So let's dive right in. The authors, well, they don't waste any time, do they? They say the American university, classics especially, is basically moribund, deep trouble.
Yeah, no punches pulled. And right away, they point the finger squarely at the professors inside these institutions.
They paint this picture of academics being deeply hypocritical, like berating students about race, gender, class.
While living lives, the authors argue, that are pretty detached from the underprivileged groups they talk about.
Interesting. And then there's this accusation that professors lie to students. That sounds strong.
It is. They give examples like citing the evils of capitalism, but, ignoring the millions killed under communist regimes. Or denigrating Western culture while failing to acknowledge its contributions, things like constitutional government, capitalism, freedom, rational thought.
Right.
And they even bring up the ancient Greeks, often labeled racist and sexist now, but the authors point out they uniquely had public debates about the status of foreigners and women, a point often missed, they feel.
That's fascinating. So this leads into that idea they call academic populism, but they flip it, right?
Completely. It's not about serving the public. It's about the absurdity, as they see it, of well-paid, tenured professors railing against the system from comfortable positions.
Talking about abstract up-images and up-labels.
Exactly. While the authors argue concrete problems right there at a dying field, no public interest, unprepared students, even exploited adjuncts get ignored.
They make the point that these professors are maybe among the most comfortable people around lifetime jobs, summers off.
Yet complain loudest about American life. That's the critique.
So how does this connect to research methodology? You mentioned that earlier.
Well, that's central to their academic populism idea. It focuses on the how of research and the consistency between talk and action.
Okay.
They argue much postmodern research is anti-empirical, illogical, full of jargon, just inaccessible. And they claim it functions as a kind of method of subsidy.
Oh, it's a how?
By excusing professors, essentially, from teaching the students who pay their salaries. That's the argument.
Wow. And they contrast this with, like, surgeons or engineers.
Right. They use technical language, sure, but for concrete results, removing a tumor, building a bridge, campus theorists, they claim, use abstraction to, ensure students aren't really taught and the public stays in the dark.
So the authors are saying academics blame everything but themselves. Video games, TV, pop culture.
Pretty much anything external. Yet the irony they point out is profound.
Yeah.
The Greeks' discovery of freedom, imperfect as it was, started this whole evolving process we're still in. And they provocatively say the world's becoming more populous, more Greek, just as the people supposed to be guarding that legacy are betraying it.
Which brings us to their specific critiques, like with Martha Nussbaum.
Yes, they really engage with her arguments. They claim she dismisses critics as just being motivated by anxiety and resentment.
And offers mainly anecdotal evidence for her own views.
That's their reading. They also scrutinize her idea of multiculturalism, like how much culture truly separates, say, middle-class white women from their fathers.
Or American-born minorities from the broader American culture, especially given history, like the end of the slave trade or Catholicism among Mexican Americans.
Right. How deep do those cultural distinctions really run in that context? That's the question they pose.
And they contrast Nussbaum's view with Charles Taylor's ideas.
Yeah, Taylor's distinction between the politics of recognition, acknowledging group identity, and the liberal politics of universalism focused on common rights.
And they feel Nussbaum leans towards a kind of racialist view of culture.
They suggest her arguments sometimes imply that. For instance, suggesting black students felt alienated from Western classics because they were black.
But the authors counter that based on their teaching experience.
Yeah, they say student response to Homer or Socrates depends on the individual, their inclination, not their race or gender.
So, stepping back, they connect this to the philosopher Joseph de Maistre.
Right. His idea that there's no universal man, only specific nationalities. They argued this underpins a lot of multiculturalism, leading to cultural relativism, where no culture is more true.
But they see an inconsistency there.
A big one. Because these same advocates often critique the West, using principles from the Western tradition itself, like innate rights, the very thing Martin Luther King Jr. used.
So the West actually invented the tools being used to critique it.
That's their argument. And they say the idea of the rational individual Nussbaum champions is itself a Western invention. They also dismiss the notion of a traditionalist straw man constantly under attack.
Because Western tradition is critical questioning.
Exactly. That's its essence, they argue. It's not some static dogma.
It's fascinating how they then point out that studying other cultures isn't new. Goethe, Matthew Arnold.
Centuries ago, they were doing intercultural education long before the current version of multiculturalism.
And the authors claim this modern multiculturalism has become like the establishment ideology, a secular religion of diversity.
Yeah, almost a way to signal your superior social conscience, as they put it. They even compare Nussbaum to a sophist.
Ouch. Sacrificing truth for political points, basically.
Oh, yeah. So that's the implication.
Okay, so Nussbaum argues these special studies programs, African American, women's, gender studies, aim to create world citizens skilled in Socratic argument. How do the authors respond?
They question the practicality. They use this example, Anna, struggling in China. They ask, wouldn't critical thinking from a traditional liberal arts degree or just learning Chinese be more helpful than women's studies courses?
It raises that question. How do you apply criteria for criticism as a world citizen if you reject Western principles?
Right. They bring up the example of clitorectomies, where they say Nussbaum seems to avoid direct judgment, preferring an internal critique.
Which leads to that analogy of academics being like Aeneas, talking about decline but not acting.
Yes, the worm within the apple. They see much of the crisis as these self-inflicted wounds.
And they claim this new humanities scholarship, heavy on critical theory and politics.
Often lacks solid reasoning and evidence. It kind of dumbs down intellectual curiosity, they argue, and dismisses opposing views on moral grounds, not intellectual ones.
Do they have evidence for this impacting students?
They present statistics suggesting the decline in humanities enrollment lines up almost exactly with the rise of this race, gender, class scholarship.
Students voting with their feet.
That's the phrase they use. And they point to curricula, like at Cal State Monterey Bay back then, focused entirely on identity categories.
With no core European or American classics. Not even Shakespeare.
According to their account, yes.
But then they contrast this with the Clementine course.
Right, for disadvantaged students, based explicitly on those so-called canonical, hegemonic, phallocentric Western texts.
The ones often criticized as oppressive.
Exactly. And it was hugely successful. Graduates got full college scholarships.
So the authors use this to argue those texts can actually be liberating, empowering.
Precisely. Which really makes you question the motives behind discarding them, doesn't it? That's their implication.
This ties back to the hypocrisy point again, doesn't it?
It does. They argue many new humanists blame society, but rarely volunteer for more teaching or leave their comfort zones. They suggest guilt spawns theory.
And that self-advancement or rampant careerism is a big driver.
Yeah. They quote John Ellis saying literature involves politics, but it's not everything. And they critique the poverty of criticism that reduces everything to power, mentioning Stanley Fish's work as adolescent sophistry.
Harsh words. What about this theory cult they mentioned?
It's this idea that value is placed on knowing the latest theory, having this aura of sophistication, more than actual deep scholarship.
And then there's the personal voice critique.
Yes. They characterize that style as often angry, whiny, passive-aggressive, filled with irrelevant personal details, sex lives, breakdowns, tenure fights.
Not scholarship, but an embarrassing memoir.
That's how they frame it. Often, they say, from Upset, upper-middle-class white academics talking about themselves instead of Plato or Sophocles.
Which leads into that really shocking anecdote about Professor Judith Hallett.
The FBI call, yes. Claiming Hanson and Heath resembled the Unabomber based on their views and appearance.
They present that as academic vindictiveness at its wackiest.
Absolutely. An extreme example, they argue, of how self-serving things can get and how the personal voice approach can lack intellectual honesty, especially when contrasted with demands for anonymity in peer review.
So how does all this impact the university's core mission, according to them?
They describe this dangerous vertical divide, a split between the top, the careerist elites, both old-school philologists and new theorists, and the bottom, the majority who actually focus on teaching and making scholarship accessible.
And this elite group monopolizes resources, teaches less, writes more for fewer people.
And doesn't justify the value of classics to the public. They point out that both traditionalists and so-called leftists often look down on undergraduate teaching. Some famous professors even openly admitted prioritizing research over teaching.
So while research is vital,
The system rewards these big ideas that often lead to obscure, recycled work that's useless in the classroom. Unclear writing, they say, is often just unclear thinking hidden by jargon.
it comes back to justifying their existence then. Universities need graduates who can engage with the world.
That's the bottom line. And that needs a shift back to valuing good teaching and public engagement.
Now, they also address the typical left-right fight in classics.
Yeah, they argue it's less about survival and more about elitists fighting for the advantages of elitism.
And they're not against research.
Not at all. They explicitly say, of course we are quite simply frauds if we do not do research. Their issue is with the priorities and the disconnect.
The lack of relevance or accessibility.
Yeah, exactly. Which leads him to propose concrete solutions.
Like,
Shifting grad student funding towards those who actually want to teach, discouraging endless research grants for people with light teaching loads, getting classicists back into classrooms and libraries, less focus on endless conferences, developing curricula that actually interest the public.
and they connect this to academic capitalism.
Right. Why do academics who criticize capitalism so eagerly chase the rewards of this system, status, salary, prestige, over actual educational impact? That's the provocative question.
Towards the end, they strongly defend Western and Greek civilization.
Vigorously. They argue the Greeks created the fundamental blueprint: democracy, free inquiry, the middle class, political freedom, rationalism.
And they push back against the idea that the West is just derivative of the East.
Strongly. Using historical examples, Greek public spaces, citizen militias, showing fundamental differences from autocratic neighbors.
And a key part of this defense is the West's self-criticism.
Absolutely crucial. The tradition inherited from Greece is uniquely self-critical, always questioning, seeking improvement, admitting flaws. That's the engine of progress, they argue.
They even say Greek writers were harsher critics of their own culture than modern multiculturalists are.
Yeah, which puts things in perspective. And it grounds their call to return to the Socratic mission. Seek truth, expose hypocrisy, foster independent thought.
A mission they feel has been replaced by the academic capitalists.
That's the term, yes.
So the final picture they paint is kind of bleak. These tenured radicals aren't rebels, but company men.
Assimilated into the university as a utilitarian industry. Their ideologies, like relativism and multiculturalism, are actually quite compatible, paradoxically, with the global economic order.
And that final image, the battle of frogs and mice.
Stark, isn't it? Academics in a mock epic struggle, stroking and scratching at each other for their tiny portion of an evaporating pond.
Wow. Okay. As we wrap up this deep dive into Bonfire of the Humanities, what really stands out is definitely a challenging read.
It really is. It forces you to confront some uncomfortable ideas about institutions we tend to respect.
They paint such a vivid picture of this crisis originating within academia, driven by, well, incentives that reward personal gain and ideology over teaching.
Yeah, and their argument is clear. For classics, and maybe the humanities broadly, to survive and mean something, there has to be a real shift.
A return to accessible teaching, scholarship that connects with the public.
And a commitment to that core value of critical inquiry and self-reflection, which, ironically, they trace right back to the ancient world some academics now seem to dismiss.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, as you go about your week is this. In an age overflowing with information, but where wisdom often feels scarce, how might the lessons from this bonfire, this critique, guide us all in rekindling a genuine search for knowledge and truth?